Hi everyone, this is Chris Lim of Spiffio, and I just came across a really interesting discussion today on a Facebook group I'm a part of that's for pastors. Somebody was asking about how other churches are doing song translation. This is really interesting because it's always possible if your church has people who speak other languages like Spanish or Korean or something else besides English, that you can use interpreters to interpret the service. But there's a huge part of worship services that is not addressed by this, and that's the ability to participate in congregational singing. And so often it's difficult for worship leaders to prepare in advance songs that can be sung in other languages. So in this conversation, someone was just asking about how other churches are doing this, and one person from a primarily Spanish speaking congregation shared about how their church is doing it, and I was really impressed. It's a lot of work. They had three translators: somebody who does the sermon, somebody who does announcements and other things like that in the service, and then somebody who also translates the altar call. And they're doing this for a handful of English speaking families who are showing up in their church. And she also said that their church is providing scripture translations in advance on the slide, and they're showing the main lyrics with an English translation that maybe cannot be sung underneath it, italicized, so that at least people can understand the songs that are being sung. I find this really fascinating because I also grew up in an Indonesian church, and we would have kind of a database of PowerPoints, I guess you could say, where we've already done the hard work over time of finding translations of songs from English into Indonesian or Indonesian to English. And many times you can't find a translation, and translation of music, of poetry, is that much harder than just translation of prose. And so it was just great to hear about how this church is doing it and the lengths that they're going to be able to include these English speaking families in their congregation. I've seen it done where you have churches that even go a step further, perhaps in the worship leaders preparing to teach a song in another language. And oftentimes they try to go find a native speaker of that language. They practice, they learn, they try to even imitate the musical styles of the culture that that song comes from. Um, and and then they get a lot of joy. The worship leaders and the worship team gets a lot of joy after from practicing that music and being able to share that with the congregation. But it's another level of work of inclusion when it comes to congregational singing. There's another thing I wanted to share about, which is exploring ways that we can simplify that process of translation of music. So this is an experiment that we're doing right now at Spiffio, uh, where we are using ChatGPT because it can take in more of the context and you can ask it to write poetry to try to do a first pass singable translation of a worship song. And so we're trying to do that and incorporating that in our product so that if you can get a singable translation of any song, that increases the real participation and belonging that a person feels when they come to a church that not only provides translation, but makes it possible for them to sing along. And this is obviously not going to replace the hard work that human translators do to be able to get all the theological meaning that they want out of a song, to get the right artistry and poetry, and to make sure the syllables all line up. But we hope that it can really increase the amount of localization of the worship service so that someone who shows up who doesn't speak the main language can feel like they truly belong in that church. So, anyway, Don shared a couple of those ideas with you. If there's anything that you thought was interesting, would love to hear from you, or unique ideas that your church does for doing this. I remember when I was growing up in my Indonesian church, how I longed for a worship song database that was already multilingual that can give me all this information. And I know some translations exist in a lot of the popular worship song databases, but one of the main challenges has always been copyright. And copyright kind of makes it so that a church is allowed, if they have a license, to translate for their own use, but they're not allowed to distribute those translations without permission from the copyright holder. And I think one of the big advantages of AI is that we can make it easier for every church to translate for their own personal use these worship songs in a way that they can use until the copyright situation changes to the point where there's a lot more freedom. This might even be the way that there is a lot more freedom through these AI based translations with humans in the loop. So that's a quick update. As all of your churches and pastors are preparing for Easter, I'm just hoping, praying, God blesses you guys with an amazing experience celebrating the resurrection of Jesus, and that we can more and more create foretastes of God's kingdom through the way that we can worship together. So that's my update for today from Spiffio. Thanks so much for our pursuit of creating access in any language, especially for churches, and we'll talk to you soon.